We're just going to get straight into it. So.
Okay, right, we'll wait till everyone's in here.
Yeah. Just wait for everyone to settle and then we'll...
Hello.
G'day. How are you?
Oh, we're feeling quite angry, to be honest.
Yeah, g'day.
Yeah. My name is Violetta, and I'm here with a number of women, and we've been listening to you this weekend. And actually we feel quite upset about what you've said about prayer.
Yeah. Why is that, Violetta?
Because we were taught something so different.
Yep.
And I was a nun in the Catholic tradition.
Yep.
And I feel so angry that the very things you're saying that we need to connect to our Father, we were taught were evil parts of us.
Yeah.
And we don't know what to do now with the rage.
Yeah. And do you feel so angry because you lived such a long time on earth with these ideas and concepts that you're now learning are probably false? Is that how you're feeling? Yep.
And I lived so long on earth, and I have lived so long here now.
Yeah.
And only now I hear that what I was taught was so wrong and that I have battled against was actually a thing that my Father loves and that I need.
Yeah.
And I feel I've lost so much of not only my life but of my connection to that thing that I had as a girl.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sad, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, we don't know what to do.
Yeah. Well, how long ago did you live, Violetta?
In the 1700s.
Yeah. And you lived in...
Holland.
Holland? Yep.
And I lived from a girl of 16 till 83 as a nun.
Yeah, long time.
I dedicated...
Your whole life?
Sorry.
Whole life.
Yes.
Yeah.
I dedicated my whole life to something which I feel it's destroyed me now. And I have lived so much since then, believing that I'm still sinning so much that I can't feel my Father's love, my Father's gratitude. I feel nothing, and I have blamed myself
for it the whole time.
More and more.
Yeah, and this is the problem with false beliefs on earth, isn't it? Like, it's a huge problem, and people don't on earth really realise. A lot of people on earth think, beliefs are not that. I know you didn't believe this on earth, but a lot of people now believe that beliefs don't matter very much, but they have a huge impact on our future.
Well, I understand why now, why people say they don't matter, because I feel I have been through, since listening to you the last few days, I have been through so many thoughts that I let my beliefs matter too much. That I let my beliefs override a part of me that is not wrong.
Yep. Trying to force yourself to believe things that in your heart you sort of feel almost opposite to sometimes. It's difficult.
Well, no, I believed in my heart it was wrong. I believed all of my emotions were my sin, all of my femininity, all of my self.
Yep.
What I think now is myself. I still don't really understand what you're saying, but it feels like something very essential to me.
You suppressed, pushed it away constantly. You were taught to.
I don't know how to reach that again.
Yeah. Well, your anger is the beginning of reaching it. So
It's hard even having
yeah.
I have it so much.
Yeah, like rage.
Yes.
Yeah, rage. About, what is it now? 400 years of lost life. Yeah. Well, I understand the pain. I do. And the pain is a direct result. It's not your fault. It's a direct result of teachings that you were taught as a young girl, that you started to believe and were almost, if you look back on it, probably even sort of forced into believing to a degree.
Well, I didn't enter that life understanding how much I would need to give up of myself.
Yeah.
I didn't even until just now feel that I had given up on myself.
Yeah.
And I still feel there is so much shame when I contemplate what you have described, not just prayer to be this emotional and personal interaction, but also this prayer you've been examining to feel a goodness about myself, to feel that I am created good. When I even say those words, I feel shame and fear and...
Well, a lot of the Catholic faith is fundamentally based upon this idea that you're born a sinner and fundamentally that you remain one without Jesus' blood, you remain one forever.
And in my life, I was taught to believe that as a woman, I'm even less worthy, even less worthy of, well, you it was, but and God. Yeah. And that I must suppress the feminine urges, the emotional, the instinctuals, the intuitive. All of these things were viewed as my sins.
Yeah.
The sexual, all of it. Yep.
No, you did right. That's exactly the purpose of creating the nunnery, wasn't it? To suppress all of these things.
Well, it's been a revelation to begin to consider these things in a new light, and it's a very rapid. Obviously, there's many of us here, and we have been questioning in recent times, years. Is there something
else?
Something wrong? Is there something else? We've tried so hard to live in a way that we thought was right and holy, if you like, and yet we still feel in darkness. We still feel very distant from our Father, and we still feel very well. What we began to discover is we felt more and more empty, and now to hear this, and so quickly, there's so many things that are changing, but also so much
sort of rushing in of emotion that's occurring.
Yes, and the rage.
Yeah,
it's very difficult not to feel that.
You want to sort of express it somehow.
But we go, or I go through waves of that, and then the feeling that this is a very big sin. It is a very big sin for me to feel this intensely about anything.
Yeah, well, this is something that is important to understand. When we have had something that has been false taught to us for a long period of time, that we've imbibed as true, and then we're taught a truth that shows how false the prior thing was, there is undoubtedly going to be some anger. about that, because it's a lost period of time of life. There's going to be some disappointment. But I must say that the main reason why it's anger is because there's also a resistance to the sadness. You follow what I mean?
Yes.
There is this, how you've learnt on earth to be very stoic, like bear things, to bear
Yes.
bear your cross, bear your burden.
Yes, and I've come to sort of see myself almost from
a distance.
From outside myself.
Yeah, like you're observing yourself rather than being yourself.
Yes, and live totally in the mind. And totally, any time there's a desire that I feel is impure or not correct, to
suppress it with your mind.
Yes, deny it and to chastise myself for it.
Yeah, punish yourself for it, really. Yeah. Yes, and because of that, and then to find out that all of that was all unnecessary, is also such a disturbing thing, isn't it, to find out? So I understand why you feel angry. But it's your grief that is going to heal you, not your anger. So when you get angry, it's a way of trying to control, the pain of something. You understand? So when you feel this angry, you're still trying to control the grief that's inside of you about having 400 years of lost life. Make sense? And the key is to allow, what I've learnt to do myself is to take my grief to God and go and just bear my grief there like I suppose you could say like an offering. This is my grief and this is how I feel. I'm
not sure if I don't feel angry with God right now.
Of course, but
how does God
allow it?
I understand what you're saying, but how does God allow this?
Well, God didn't allow it for a start. The Catholic faith was developed by men right back in the 300s, and it was developed for the purpose of obtaining power over people.
Well, they had it over me.
Yeah. And it was not in accordance with anything I taught in the first century. And it's also not in accordance with God and God's views either. And God is if you feel God's feelings about it, you feel that God does feel that it's a very bad thing that was done to you.
You must tell everybody this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we're trying to tell everybody. But you can see on earth the big problem is that if people want power, they create all sorts of regimes to create a structure for the power to exist, and then they support that structure through violence. Right?
But now I feel violent. I feel like I want to go to the earth and destroy every system.
Yeah.
They all seem now to oppress.
Yeah, they do. You will, and like I said, this feeling that you're having is because you don't yet want to, or feel you're able to cry about it, to just grieve.
I feel feelings that are worrying to me, but I feel that if I cry,
you're sort of
how will it be corrected?
Yes, yeah. So it's sort of like a justice feeling with your anger. And this is the trouble with anger sometimes, is that you can sort of get to the stage where you feel like, but if I let go of my anger, then I'm letting go of anybody getting punished for what they did. And
I feel still the indoctrination in me that if I cry, then I am weak and I am showing that this part of me, this emotional part of me, is useless and is...
but that's not how God feels.
Is my sin as a woman.
Yeah, that's not how God feels, though. Your emotions are your power of the soul. It's the power of your soul are your emotions. And suppressing those emotions is suppressing your true self, is how God feels. So the key is to... Remember when I was talking to the Muslim fellows earlier, to Hada, I was saying to him, well, we've got to at some point sort of honour God in this process too. So a part of honouring God is, yes, you're coming to terms now of how you were created, to be a feeling, intuitive, emotional being, sexual, but you were created to be that, right? Part of honouring God is, that's what I'm going to be,
Yes, and I
understand the difficulty you have crying.
And I really, honestly, I feel like I want God to honour me for once. I feel like I've spent centuries honouring this God.
Yeah, but God already does honour you. But he honours the real you. He honours your sadness. He honours your feelings. He doesn't honour the person you were forced into becoming.
And so what do I do with that experience that I've lived?
You grieve it. That's the only thing that's left for you to do.
That can't give me back.
No, but you do not yet know what God's got ahead of you. So there are huge rewards for just letting yourself grieve and then embracing what God's got ahead of you. See, on earth, when you accepted the Catholic faith and you embraced being a nun, you were accepting what men put ahead of you. You understand? And in the process of doing that, you've borne the unfortunate results of that, which are suppressing the feminine nature that you have. Right?
Yes.
That's the unfortunate results of just listening to men and then believing them.
Yes.
Yeah. And you were at such a young age when you believed them that you were just a child, really, when you believed them. And so none of that is actually your fault. It's somebody else's fault, as you now know, which is good that you know that it's somebody else's fault.
Yeah.
But your rage is your desire to avoid your grief about it. Does that make sense to you?
It does, but I don't know if I want to give up rage.
Yeah, I understand. But you'll find that a relationship with God and also the beautiful things that come from that, you have to get to that grief at some point. Does that make sense? The grief is the real feeling and the rage is the feeling you create when you don't want to feel the real feeling.
And can I... How can God... I feel so angry with God, but also I feel so needy to be shown that God is not the God that I've been trying to serve and please. So
first you're going to have to go through your anger with God about it. Now, I know that you sort of feel, is God going to punish me for that? I don't know. Is God going to make my situation worse if I feel that? God isn't going to do that because God honours your honesty. Do you understand? So if you feel angry at God and you feel for a while like blaming God, it's not God's fault, of course.
And it's somewhere I know that as well.
Exactly.
It's hard for...
It's more men's fault, isn't it, than God's, that this has happened.
The whole structure of the church and the men involved in it.
Yep. And the wielding of power is really the main reason why it happened.
And then the fact that I did this to other women as well. I taught them these things.
Yeah, but, you could say by this stage you were, to use a more modern term, almost brainwashed into teaching them this way, weren't you? It wasn't... this is the trouble with teaching a child a certain set of beliefs, is that child, instead of feeling the freedom to explore different beliefs, the child ends up feeling that is the belief and I must enforce that belief for myself but also for everyone I meet. And God knows that. So you don't need to feel that sort of guilty or anything about those things. All you need to do is just grieve that it happened.
It just feels like such a mess, but also it feels like something that has been built up in me for so long. Not the anger, the beliefs.
Yeah.
The beliefs feel like concrete blocks of a structure that I've built.
Yeah, and not only you built, right? So people even implanted them there.
Yes, yes.
And then you've built upon them.
Yes.
Built upon the false foundation.
Yes.
And you could say that's the foundation of sand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I talked about.
Yeah.
Yep. And this is the trouble with a foundation, like a house built on sand, is that eventually it must fall. And you've just got to grieve the fact that all that effort was put into building it and all that faith was put into building it, and yet it was all false and it's just got to fall.
And how can I feel strong as I grieve?
Well, you can't. That's the point of grief. See, the anger wants you want to be strong, and that's why the anger exists.
Yeah.
And you really can't be strong while you grieve, But you'll actually find there's a real relief in it, grieving is a relieving process where you come out of it feeling like you can breathe again, like you're free and peaceful and serene. And, that's the beauty of not trying to gain control over your grief, but always letting yourself feel it, is that you end up, after you've felt it, you end up in a state where you feel relieved of the burden of it. Yeah? When you hold on to it, you're not only holding on to the grief, but you're also creating anger. And then you've got a double issue. You've got the grief that's being stored, that's still determining your actions. And then you've got, on top of that, the anger that drives a lot of, violent behaviour, potentially. The key is to learn how to feel your anger without becoming violent with it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, because now I feel, as you're saying this, I see that it's not good to be violent.
Yep.
But now I feel
But you don't want to suppress your anger.
Temptation to suppress it.
Correct,
yes.
correct. So you remember Paul said that you could be angry but not sin. You remember that?
Yeah.
And at the time you read that, and probably all your earth life, you haven't thought that that's possible, right? But now you can see that you can be angry and not sin. And the way you do that is by feeling your anger in a private setting where you've got things to bash and you've got things to yell at and you've got, you know what I mean? And God's also happy if you want to yell there as well. He'll be right with that because he can handle it. Right? He knows that he's not to blame for what's happened to you, even if sometimes you feel he is. And also, he knows who is to blame, and he has already attributed that blame to those people through his laws. So he's already done that as well. And after a while, after you get through your anger, you'll feel that, you can see that. You'll be able to even visit some of the people who, were responsible for the establishment of those rules and laws, and you'll be able to see what's happened to them in their past and see that there is a burden that they bear that's way beyond even your current burden, right? So you will see the justice in it eventually, but I'm not saying you'll be able to skip to there. You won't be able to skip over the rage you have. You need to let yourself go through it, but you need to do it in a manner that's not going to get violent with others. Otherwise, then you sin and hurt others, you see. But you can feel and experience anger without becoming violent and destructive towards others. And also you can ask some of your friends. I've got some friends coming to you now, and they're going to show you how to create an environment where you can just express your anger without hurting anyone. You follow? But the goal of the anger is of going through your anger is to get to your grief. Now, this is so what we need to do is talk a little bit about your attitude to the grief needs to change. You follow me? Your attitude at the moment is, I want to control it. I think it's weak. I think it's powerless. That's your attitude at the moment. And you have a lot of judgment for that, right?
Yes.
That it's weak and powerless. unless you change that attitude towards your grief, you will be very inclined to go into anger all the time. Does that make sense? So there is a needing to be some beliefs changed internally that say, no, I can feel my anger and I can do it in a righteous way, you know. Then I can, after I've felt through this anger, I can see that you'll feel that your anger is a direct result of you trying to control your grief. Does that make sense to you? And you'll feel that, and then you'll feel like, oh, I don't want to control it anymore. I just want to have the relief and the peace of feeling it and letting it go. That makes sense? And once you break through to that point, you'll have a period of grieving. And of course, there is a lot to grieve. You know, the 400 years of lost life, lost individuality, lost sexuality, lost emotions, lost intuition, lost being a woman, lost the joy of experiencing yourself and understanding even your personality and your nature, feeling like all of those things got lost. That's a lot to grieve, right? But God will help you grieve. And if you ask God for love during that period, He will give it to you, and it will help you. He'll help you go through the grief, and also help you be happier sooner. You follow? Yeah. I know it's very tempting to get angry with God about it and to think, oh, it was a religion, so it's all God's fault. But
it's not really that.
No.
It's not really that we feel it's God's fault.
But it's tempting because of the anger, you see, the anger's. When the anger's there, we have a temptation to blame everyone and sundry, even if they weren't involved. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And also, don't avoid where the anger should be aimed either, in the sense that it's with anger you need to come to the terms with the fact that there are certain people responsible, but also that I can feel my anger without aiming it anywhere. I don't need to punish those people. God's got all of that correction process in order already, right?
I think the difficulty, and I will be very honest, that a number of us are now having is that it's very hard to say.
That's all right. That's all right.
That we can't listen to men anymore.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I get it.
And it's very hard to say that because we don't. Yeah, but it's the truth of what's happening.
You're my sister, but I understand. Like, you've been what I would view as abused by men all of your life. And the way they've abused you is through your beliefs. Do you understand? They've taught you false beliefs and abused you by using those beliefs to abuse you. And so that's no different than violent abuse and no different than sexual abuse and
those things did happen.
Yeah, that's right. Those things also happen, particularly, right, by other men, religious so-called, as well, right? So God understands why you feel the way you feel, right? And I do too. And, not all men are like that, but unfortunately there is a large majority of men on earth like that, unfortunately, as you well know. And particularly during the time in which you lived when there was less law controlling their behaviour. So, again, this is something that can be grieved, and God hasn't let them off the hook for their behaviour. God's taken issue with their behaviour through the law, and they have received the just compensation for their bad behaviour, right? But if you allow yourself to get into this dynamic where you want the very last one of them to finish their punishment before you grow towards God, then you're going to be waiting a long time.
It's not that. It's just a matter of trust now.
Yeah. I understand. Yeah. But God's a woman as well as a man. God's has a feminine nature as well as a masculine one. Yes? You can feel that, surely.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
And so you know that God's not entirely male. So even though I am, God isn't.
It's hard to say that, but it does seem important to be truthful about what is happening.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I know now you're saying it's hard to trust Jesus and all that, and that seems very complicated for you.
Yeah.
But
But we are listening.
Yeah.
And actually, it just has helped to say that.
Yeah.
Too.
But you've got to remember, you're also saying that through Mary, who is my other half. Not Mother Mary, but Mary Magdalene, who's my other half, and she also has had a similar experience. You know that.
Yeah.
Yes, to what you've had at the hands of men. So in our soul, we have compassion for the circumstance you're in. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you. No, we feel softer now. So.
Yeah. Just be okay about your anger. It's okay to express it. The women that I've asked to come, they're with you now, and they'll be able to help you sort of create an environment where you can express your rage and then get into your sadness. And when you feel blocked, it'll be because there's more rage to feel, and then you express your rage again and you feel some sadness. And after a while, you get used to getting to the point where you no longer need the power over your sadness. Mm-hmm. And once you get to the point where you don't need power over your sadness anymore, you won't get angry anymore. Make sense? Yeah. But also don't forget to ask God for love. Your mum, God's your mum, and ask her for love, and she'll help you through that process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. We can feel what you say is true.
Yeah.
Thank you for your help. And again,
thanks for coming. And it's good that you expressed your rage.
We feel very embarrassed now.
No, you don't need to be. It's, there are so many people of religious faith who have lived these very stoic, shut down lives, thinking they're doing the right thing, and all of them have got very similar experiences that you are going through now to have.
We have to help them.
That's right. There's billions of those people on earth right at this moment. And so to have a group of people like yourselves who are aware of what they're going to need to experience, you have a great capacity to be able to help them at some point in the future. But you need to go through the experience yourself first to understand it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I'm very sorry that you've had that terrible experience. Yeah.
We're very sorry we got it wrong for so long.
Well, you didn't get it wrong. You were taught wrong. And this is one thing to bear in mind, is that it's not your fault. You say you got it wrong, but it's not your fault you got it wrong. And you are barely culpable for the things you got wrong in the circumstances you were in. Yep.
Yes, it's hard not to feel that we have done a lot of wrong, though.
I know. I understand.
We've treated ourselves and others, and even in the way that we've worshipped you, and it feels very wrong.
Well, it's wrong, but if you allow yourself to ask God what she feels about your culpability.
Mm-hmm. Less than we think.
Less than you think, yeah. Yes, and that's worth remembering too, right? Because one of the traps you don't want to get into here is blaming yourself for what you did after you were indoctrinated into a process. Yeah? And you were indoctrinated into a process at such a young age, when you were a little girl, that it was highly unlikely the rest of your life wouldn't occur, given how indoctrinated your whole family and how you were pushed into that life, and what they wanted from you. Your family wanted, and then the religious faith wanted. And you were taught that this is the way you worship God, by giving all of these people all the things they want. And this is, this level of indoctrination that's occurred is fundamentally like getting a child and moulding its mind to the point where it's incapable of thinking and breaking away from it for hundreds of years later. Do you understand?
Mm-hmm.
So don't be so harsh on yourself about it. You follow?
Okay.
Yeah, God's not going to be harsh on you about it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty heavy life. That. Mm. There you go.
Sad.
Yeah, sad life. Yeah, what can you say about that? It's just like hundreds of years of living in a certain way, indoctrinated, abused by religion in the name of God, and it's such a blasphemy, you know. And the people who have lived those lives bear such terrible burdens. And as I said to her, the only way is to be soft to your sadness about it. Yeah, there's no other thing you can really do, you know, because there's no way to change it now. It's done, and this is where she'll find that God is going to give her so many blessings that she'll get to a point in a few years, and it's not going to be too many away, where she hardly remembers what happened to her. Mm. Yeah. Any questions, you guys? Yeah. Who would you like, Pat?
If we go start at the back, Rebecca, and then come to Eura.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I've got the mic. See, I just need to turn them off of mute. Thank you. And thank you.
Thank you. It feels like we just witnessed such an example of God's mercy and love and everything in the prayer. But
Yeah.
why now? Why, if God was always giving that mercy and love?
Why now?
Why now? With regard to the women in particular, you saying, Bex, or
Why are the women receiving God's tender mercy and desire and everything in the prayer now?
I'm not sort of understanding your question.
The
Maybe
last
Mary.
few hundred years.
Yeah, because they before that point, they weren't really looking for something being wrong with what they were doing. So God felt compassion for the situation that they were in and for the hard time they were giving themselves, because they were really hard on themselves about the fact that they
and by the way, I must point out that
progressing.
they've been surrounded by thousands of spirits trying to help them.
Yeah.
For all that time.
But their will was so engaged in what they had been taught on earth that they had to sacrifice more of themselves, and that it was obviously the part of them that was a problem, that they were in a state of darkness and that they weren't progressing, or that they couldn't feel God. Yeah. It shows the power of asking, doesn't it? You know, reflecting and asking, and yeah.
Yeah, what happened with this group was that once our spirit friends, we organised with our spirit friends in advance what we were going to talk about a bit. And I said to our spirit friends some time ago that we want to really focus on relationship with God and prayer in this coming series of talks we do. And they know that now we've got an opportunity to bring some spirits who, like the Muslim spirits beforehand, and also the Christian spirits who have just come, to bring some spirits along who have been blocked. And they can't see us, and we can't get to them. Their belief systems are so indoctrinated from such a long time, and for such a long, firm, there's this firmness of spirit in them to stoically continue in it. Our spirit friends might have been able to help them like hundreds of years ago, but the trouble is these women couldn't even see them. Like they were so indoctrinated in their belief systems and so indoctrinated in having to keep it up, and so fearful too about about hell and whether they're in purgatory or hell, and why would they be in such a thing, and for these women they were afraid they were in purgatory, which is a sort of like a Catholic doctrine teaching you about not in hell where you're burning, but in purgatory where you're in no man's land, and so they knew they weren't in hell as it was defined to them in their religious beliefs, but they didn't know. They knew they're not in heaven either.
That's why they kept feeling like there must be something more we can do
that
we have to do to get into heaven.
We have to earn heaven.
Yeah.
Is what they were feeling, and because they were so stuck in the belief systems of the Catholic faith, they couldn't even see a spirit who didn't have those same beliefs. Right?
Yeah.
So
that's a beautiful thing about us talking about prayer on this trip, is that that's something that they think about a lot,
So that's the attraction.
They're drawn to that discussion rather than maybe some other discussions we've had in the past. So.
And of course they're drawn, and then they hear all these other things about emotion and desire and sexuality as well. We've talked a bit about that this weekend, haven't we? And embracing your soul-based desires. And, they're hearing all these truths for the very first time just this weekend. The very first time in their entire life that they've heard these things. And what would you do? 400 or so years of living in an indoctrinated lifestyle, hoping you're going to earn heaven by doing it. And then, somebody on earth is teaching about things that you then realise that all of those things were blocked from you by your indoctrination from others. Like, you can understand why the rage would be there, right? You can understand why somebody get pretty angry about that, about all that lost life. Yeah.
And there was quite a bit they went through also just having our identity confirmed as well. So Paul came, they were attracted, and then Paul came, and then I didn't know this till just this moment, but and they were like, oh, okay, we recognise you, and then he sort of added weight, I suppose, to what we were saying because he could confirm who we were, and yeah. It's nice for them.
So when Mary says Paul, the Apostle Paul, she's referring to that you would have heard of. Who's next?
You're.
Who else had their hand up? That was my question too, but I've got another one. Is since you're giving back God's truth on earth now, I've noticed a lot of men, and especially young men, including me, using divine truth to get, control or power over women.
Yeah.
And I would like you to say, like, what the quality one must develop before pretending to teach, divine truth, and also what's the reason of the unloving, desire that would draw men to do that, and also what the consequences for such behavior for oneself and for others.
Good question, Yura. There's been many hundreds of thousands of years of men trying to dominate women, unfortunately. It began because when the first human couple sort of left the potentiality of receiving God's love, what started to happen, remember yesterday I talked to you about the animal instincts. Remember I talked about that? And maybe I might just remind you by just drawing a few things about it. So you remember, so with the soul, of course, there's two halves to a soul, right? And then you've got the bodies, the spirit body and the physical body connected to the half. So the mostly masculine half of the soul. Obviously, there's male bodies if it's mostly masculine, and mostly feminine half of the soul is, mostly. I'll give you girls' dresses. Of course, if the soul is dominantly masculine, then both halves are masculine. And if the soul is dominantly feminine, both halves are feminine. But the same principles apply in the sense that there's two halves of the soul. We've now got the half of the soul sort of separated. You could say it's separated by consciousness rather than reality. In other words, you're not aware you're joined, and so you're not joined. You don't act like you're joined. You only can be joined when you become aware you are. And awareness is not an intellectual thing. You can imagine you know, but you don't. It's only when you feel it that you know. And so what happened over centuries after the, you could say the fall of man, which if you read the Paget messages, which we encourage you to do, that's why we gave you the gift, right? If you read the Paget message, you'll see we referred in there to the fall of humankind quite frequently. And a part of the fall involved the man realising that he was in a more powerful body than the woman. And in the realisation that he was in a more powerful body, he started to recognise that he could use his physical traits to dominate her. You understand? If he so chose. And unfortunately, due to the fact of being removed from the soul, from their soul feelings, they chose to do that, right? And men have been choosing that since, this domination. Then on top of that, we've got additional problems, and the additional problems include things like families believing that the male child is more important than the female. And that comes from this whole idea that if you have a male child, he'll be able to dominate things. He'll be able to, save your fears. He'll be able to, go to war for you if he has to. He'll be able, and, having women going to war when they're in slighter bodies is more difficult because they're always going to get overpowered by the violent brute of a man who's in the bigger body. You understand? So the women even started to learn that, I need to create a man, I need to have a child that eventually can grow up to protect me as well. You follow? And so then, because of this, that added to the momentum that each new generation of men believe themselves to be superior to the woman. And by the way, we're not. On a soul level, in some ways, we're partially inferior, actually, in the sense that the feminine nature has a lot more intuition built in it generally than the masculine nature does, right? And the intuition is what's going to help you with spirituality. And this is why, in fact, on earth, there are far more women connected to or even connected to spirituality than there are men, right? Because there is this inherent part of their soul, which most men are afraid of, by the way, right? And most men dishonour. There's this inherent part of the soul that involves the emotion, which women generally have a stronger connection to, particularly in the injured state. They have a stronger connection to. And what I mean by that, when a man gets injured, he becomes very intellectually dominant and brutish in his behaviour because of the bigger body. He feels he can impose himself on the woman. When a woman gets injured, she has to be more contemplative about how to use other techniques to gain control. So she has to use methods such as manipulation or deviousness to gain control. These methods are more connected to the soul rather than to the brute to the animal, they're more connected to the soul. And so naturally, even though it's an injury, oftentimes she's still more connected to the soul doing it. You follow? Right? Now, because of this, men have become more and more demanding of women and what they want from women. And because of this separation, men have also become more lonely, ironically. And when I say lonely, what I mean by that is they feel themselves to need a woman while at the same time feeling they want to dominate her. So this is a very strong dichotomy, really, that occurs in most men. Is they feel themselves to need a relationship, but when they get one, they then want to dominate the woman and dominate her thoughts and dominate her feelings, thinking that that's how they keep her there. And rather than relying on her love for him to stay and keep bound together, they're now relying on their domination to keep things bound together. Does that make sense? And so every man on earth, unless you're perfected in love by God, every single man on earth carries this injury. Right? So, it's a heavy injury. You know, you've been present at some of our discussions with the men in our local area in Australia, and you know how forceful I am with them about this problem, don't you? I've been very outspoken about it, and I was very outspoken about it in the first century. That's why there was a lot of women following us in the first century, because I was very outspoken about it. It's also why a lot of the men in the first century were so angry with me when they were following us, right? Just like a lot of men following us now are angry with me. Many men, I get emails from men saying, you don't like men, you like women more than men, and all this kind of stuff. Of course, I also get that from women, unfortunately. So it's not true. I have a balanced view of men and women's capacities and powers, but it is true that many men carry these injuries of the dominant, brutish male, and I have seen it in what you believe to be the most gentle of men, right, carrying these injuries.
And there's a point to be made here about the fact that, because it was a good question you asked, but you're saying in the context of divine truth teachings, you see a lot of guys still engaging this same behaviour. Using teachings actually to manipulate the woman into doing what they want. Yeah. Very, very bad. It is. It's bad on a number of levels. One is, of course, you're using God's truth to try to harm another person, which means that it's not really God's truth anymore, but you're manipulating the words of what you've heard to try and harm someone. But also, a lot of you guys who engage with this like to appear that you're not like the brutish man, because you're somehow, quote unquote, more modern, spiritual, you're sensitive. And this is it's exploiting in the women a feeling of, I desire a man who's connected to spirituality. I desire a man who somehow acknowledges emotion and is more open to new ideas, open to me being myself. And then when you engage in those same domination addictions with the women in that context, it's actually trying to control a very important part of the woman, which is her spirituality. And the most important part. Yes, trying to gain domination over her spirituality, her sexuality, her emotionality and her physicality through these spiritual principles. Through beliefs. Yeah. And that is some of the biggest harm you can do to another person, is to try to dominate or control their will, trying to dominate their spirituality. Because when you just dominate a person physically, that's a big harm and a big sin. But they still have the freedom of their emotional self and their sexual self and their spiritual self. But when you engage with these spiritual principles to dominate the person, now it has the power to suppress them in every area of their life. Yeah. So you asked about the consequences of it. There's very extreme consequences on the receiver of such domination, but also upon your own soul.
Far more upon the perpetrator.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. Most men stay in hell for much longer than women do. That's an actual fact. And the main reason why they do is because of their treatment of women. That's an actual fact. And many men who are in hell don't even think they deserve to be there. That's also a fact. But they are there. So, so many men pass without thinking they have the injury. Every one of our friends in the first century, almost all of them, those who had not received God's love very much at all passed with at least 50 years in the hells afterwards because of that injury of how they treated women, even though they knew the truth. Yep.
And the sad thing is that it is just a group of emotions that men can feel through.
Yeah.
Their own feelings of, there's fears that are involved, fears about women's expression of themselves, of sexuality, a feeling of needing to gain worth from a woman. There's feelings of sort of...
I'm special, she's there to serve me, she's there to support me, she's there to make me feel good about myself.
I need that. It's actually quite an insecure position because you feel you need this from a woman in order to feel okay as a guy. If you're willing to feel, I don't feel so good as a guy, a lot of those addictive drives start to diminish. But there's a lot of resistance in men to feeling those feelings that I don't feel very adequate as a man.
Not only that, a lot of resistance in men just to grieve. Like most men are just like terrible at crying. All of you girls know that, right? How many times you notice he wants to cry, he needs to cry, but he won't cry. And then sometimes you girls get a bit freaked out when he starts crying. Why is that? Because you want the strong guy who doesn't cry so that you can cry safely. But he needs to cry. You've got to let him do it. You know what I mean? And also, he's not strong, by the way. He's angry when he doesn't cry. Yeah. People who don't cry get angry. That's what they do. And so you're just going to be dealing with a big, angrier monster than you're dealing with before if you don't let him cry, right? And, it's a disaster, really, what's happened to men in the sense that men feel that crying is a weakness. It's a woman thing. How many times have you heard in your lifetime somebody say, "Oh, you're going to be a girl now, are you?" when you got emotional about something? As a man, how many times you heard that? And how many times you hear it not just from a man as well? Quite often you hear it from women too.
If you don't hear it, you feel it, don't you? Yeah.
It's full on, yeah. The amount of judgment against crying that men receive on the planet, from other men in particular, but also from women, is intense. And so they grow up believing that they've got all these injuries of wanting to be like,
And maybe not feeling that good about yourself as a guy.
Yeah. But not wanting to grieve any of it.
But not wanting to cry anymore because you feel like, well, people are going to project more at me that I'm inadequate. Yep. So then you engage all these big addictions that end up harming other people.
Yep.
When the solution is quite simple, but not many people are aware of what really needs to happen.
Every man I know from the first century that I had anything to do with, every one of them had to cry a lot longer than every woman who I knew in the first century had to. Every single one of them. Because they did a lot more bad things that they needed to grieve and eventually repent for. And so they just had a lot more crying to do. And because they found it so hard to cry, it took them a lot longer as well. It took them a lot longer to deal with it. They just refused to deal with it for a long time. And then, we have friends who are now celestial spirits, but when they passed, they were deep in the hells because of their behaviour towards women. And they heard divine truth. They saw me performing miracles even, and it had no effect on their change towards women. They saw my own example with Mary, how I treated Mary. I had Mary with me all the time. That was unheard of in the first century. The woman followed like you see most men from the Middle East nowadays. She follows 10 metres behind, picking up the kids and doing all the things the man doesn't want to do. That's how it was in the first century, even worse than that, actually. And she was a possession, like an animal. You know, in the first century, if you want to have sex, you had sex with her, whether she wanted it or not. That's how it was for most men. And even married men, that's how every single married man in the first century, almost without exception, at some point raped his wife. Mm-hmm. Right? They had some terrible, terrible attitudes towards even their own, like, partners, their own wives, who they treated as their possession. Now, many of you guys have exactly the same feelings, but you don't want to own them. You follow? And you're going to, when you start receiving some of God's love, you'll start seeing those feelings that you have, and you'll realise, whoa, that's pretty heavy. Pretty heavy that's in me. And some of you will feel quite ashamed of it, but it's whether you're going to be able to grieve about it and work your way through it as to whether you actually will grow. Yeah. And by the way, many of you men think I'm exaggerating, and I'm not. You're going to have trouble with it. It's going to be hard for you to deal with it, and you're going to at times feel like it's hopeless, and you're going to at times feel like you want your addiction back, and you're going to believe that your addiction is good, and it's not. Because look at the damage it does. Look at the damage that men did to, what was her name? Violetta. Violet. Yeah. Look at the damage done to her. Like, the spiritual domination of her also created emotional domination of her, sexual domination of her. She was raped many times by ministers and priests and parishioners even, and all sorts, right? And then also the physical domination of her for her entire life on earth up until she died at 83 years of age. Right? And like, when you think about how like desperately bad that is for a person to live that kind of a life, and that men dominating her, firstly spiritually, caused it,
allowed it, like created
the conditions for it to occur. They caused it. Then you can see, well, as men, we've got a lot to change in order for that to change. You think about it. In how many countries of the earth right now can women vote? There's still countries on earth where they can't. In how many countries on earth, like 100 years ago, could women vote?
Not many.
Hardly any at all. And if you put it 200 years ago, there was no single country where women could. Not a single one. And that was only 200 years ago. That's only 4 or 5 generations of people, if you think of a generation being 50 years. That's not long ago. Those emotions are there inside of this generation too. And you see it playing out everywhere. Everywhere. Why is it that women are paid less? It's because of this emotion. Why is it that most women stay home looking after the kids? It's because of this emotion. Why is it that most women grow up believing their only decent role is to be a mum? It's because of this emotion.
Try being a woman who hasn't had kids
in this life.
And feel the projection. Yep. Some of you've had that experience.
Yeah. There is just so many things that are wrong with it. And when you understand that, like, God is a feminine God, you're actually sinning directly against God by doing this. It's not just, and this is why many men struggle with receiving God's love, because they're asking God for love while at the same time sinning directly against God with regard to God's feminine nature. Right? So it's a big problem on earth, and it's also one of the reasons why men started the whole idea that we're of evolution. It wasn't a woman who came up with that. It was a man who came up with that. The reason why a man came up with that is because it supported the domination of the brute. It supported the idea that the survival of the strongest or the fittest. You understand? Not ever assessing the capabilities of a soul of a person or their emotions, but rather just assessing everything based on their physical prowess, their physical abilities. Yeah. And it's, many men have no understanding of this at all, even now. And it's really interesting because you see men, if men didn't have a law binding them, like basic fundamental decency binding them, a lot of men would revert to this behaviour, and do revert to this behaviour all around the world. In Western nations, it's a well-known fact that men today are like they're the ones who 90% of the family murders are what? Partners being murdered by their husbands. Children being murdered.
Most murders are
by the man.
Family-based, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And why is that? It's because this attitude is rife. What happens with sexual abuse? Who are the main perpetrators of sexual abuse? Mostly it's men. Right? Whether that's a rape or a child abuse, a lot of times it's dominantly men. Against whom? Dominantly women. Right? And these are just these are excessive examples. But the real problem is all of this hidden stuff that goes on. All of this stuff that's just accepted by society as normal, that is not normal from God's perspective. Yeah? Quite often the man determines where you live, how you live, who you live, what's going on. You see this in all societies around the earth. When we were in America, we had people emailing us saying they could not come to our seminar because their husband told them they could not. And these women were okay with that. So not only are the men at fault, but also the women are at fault, just accepting it as if it's normal. I'm going to keep my relationship with my husband, even though he's controlling my behaviour. So it's everywhere. And they're still everywhere, on earth, still everywhere. We see it everywhere we go. It's a major topic of conversation when we talk to people as to what's blocking men from receiving God's love. You can't expect to sin against the feminine nature of God and then get God's love. You can't expect that. God's saying, no, improve your treatment of the girls, guys. Improve your treatment of them, and then you're capable of receiving some of God's love, right? But a lot of us, there's so many emotions involved for men too. It's that we could talk about for quite a few weeks. But I just wanted to say that to you. It's a good opportunity to say that to you because of your question, Yora. And it's important to understand that it all began when we all started stepping away from the fact of you could call it what are God's priorities of the soul versus human priorities of the soul. So God's priorities of the soul are, your soul comes first, and your soul being what? The spiritual side of you comes first, then comes the emotional side of you, and then comes the sexual side of you, and then comes the physical side of you. And the physical side of you includes the physical body as well as the spirit body. The spirit body is a physical body that exists in the spirit world. When you do pass, you'll feel it like it's your new physical body. That's how you'll feel it. So the physical body, right? Physical, is that how I spell it? Maybe if I can.
I can't see, John.
Right. There's the priority system as God sees it, as God established it to be. Most men, what do they see as their priority? either sexual or physical first, don't they? So either sexual, physical, or physical, sexual. And then when they look at things like emotion and spiritual, what do they think of that, most men? Emotion is like pathetic, right? Unless you're angry, which is good. Right? And then the spiritual side is like, oh, well, yes, there are men, of course, who have a spiritual side, but they still use it to dominate women generally. Right? And there's so many faiths on earth, like the Christian faith dominates women. The Muslim faith dominates women. The Hindu faith dominates women. The Buddhist faith dominates women. All these faiths that are so-called benign dominate women. The New Age faith. In the New Age faith, I have seen sexual predator after sexual predator go to each New Age group, finding another woman to have sex with and using their so-called connection with spiritual thing to get that happening. The so-called New Age faith has embraced the thing tantric stuff, where you have these men that are just dominating women sexually and telling them that, you need to heal these men sexually by having sex with all these men. We've met here in England, in fact. One group we did here in England, there was 160 or something people who came along to that group, and a good 40 of them were women who were in cults, like one cult, associated with the domination of women by those women being encouraged to have sex with every man in the group. Right? How does that happen? If the men are spiritual, it actually wouldn't happen. So they're doing it in the name of spirituality. In the spirit world, there are, like, you go to India. How many gurus in India finish up having sex with the people who come to their enclaves? Many. Those of you who might have been, you would have seen it many, many times. It's a big problem where men use, or of all kinds of religious faiths, use spirituality, so-called spirituality, which is actually their flawed desires being expressed as if God wanted you to have them. And they use that to crush women into submission sexually and emotionally. Yeah. And you can see why there's so many problems with it. Yeah. So it's a big issue. There are dire consequences for your soul doing it as men. And there are also bad consequences for the women who are abused by it. Of course. And naturally you can understand why they're upset. However, many of the women find it much easier to deal with the consequence than the men do the perpetration of the action. The reality is, when you become a perpetrator, where you take power over others, you will always find it much harder to heal from it. Right? And so this is why there are more men generally in hell than there are women. Because the men find it a lot harder to heal from their desire to perpetrate bad behaviour than the women do from trying to heal from the abuse. Make sense, Yor?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So what I'd encourage you to do is to feel about the consequences of the behaviour, but also feel about how wicked is it to use a spiritual belief just for your selfish purposes. You know, you're using the highest form of a person for your selfish sexual and physical and emotional needs. And it's a very, very wicked thing to do. And this is why many men are in hell for a long period of time, because they've been very wicked while they're on earth. Yep.
Is the question at the back related to this topic? Yeah. Let's go back there. I wanted to make a couple of points too, but for the women. So, yeah.
Sorry, Jesus. Just a little clarity on it with Violetta. You said that you use Ephesians. You use something from Paul's writing from the Bible.
Yes.
Which was it?
It was
be angry and sin not.
That you can be angry and not sin, yes.
So you were just referring to that specific words, but not endorsing the writings of currently as in the Bible.
Correct.
Okay, good, thanks.
There are many things in the Bible that have been... that are portions of it have remained that were of the original. And that's one thing that was of the original that Paul actually did write.
So you were endorsing Paul's. The question was, you were referencing it, but were you endorsing it?
I understand what the question was. What I'm saying is that particular statement that he made, he did actually make. And also, I agree with it. You can be angry and not sin. The way you can be angry and not sin is by feeling your anger in a private setting, using, expressing it and connecting to it really properly. And then once you connect to it and express it really properly, you'll find you'll very rapidly connect to your sadness. But if you use your anger to dominate your sadness, you are now sinning. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Yeah. So yes, I agree with that statement, but that doesn't mean that I agree with the whole book of Corinthians and Ephesians and Colossians and all these books of the Bible that Paul actually wrote. And also, by the way, I must say, and Paul wants me to say, that a lot of it is nowhere near what he wrote now.
He did say that in the Paget.
Yeah, he's modified it so much, right? And he said that in the Paget messages, just like Peter did and Matthew did and Luke did and John did. They've all said that in the Paget messages, just to remind you that there's a lot in there that isn't what they wrote. Yeah. Yep. Occasionally I will quote the Bible, and in this case I quoted it for her because she was connected to the Bible, and so I was giving her an illustration of there being some things in the Bible that you can actually trust. And see, one of the things she was feeling, Violetta, was that she wasn't allowed to be angry. It was a sin to be angry. Right, and this was stopping her from being able to get into her anger and then go through it and go into her sadness. And so I was trying to help her see that you're allowed to be angry. What you've done, what was done to you, is disastrous, and you're bound to feel upset about it. But don't stay in it. Like, allow yourself to work through the anger and get to that sadness. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yep. You wanted to point out.
Oh, it's all right.
Nellie?
The moment's passed.
I don't think it's passed.
Yeah. Nellie. Let's go to Nellie.
Yep.
I realize that I'm quite angry towards some men in my life.
Yep, understandably. Yep, go on. Do you want a minute, Nell? Yeah. Just ask somebody else and then you just
Anna.
have your feelings.
We'll go to Anna there.
Anna.
My question is, how, as women, when we have been hurting men in various ways, how do we honour and love God's male creations and not facilitate or support more harm, which is something that I often do with scary men.
This is what Mary wanted to talk about.
Yeah. With scary men, I often pander, and with softer men, I can be dismissive or bossy.
That's right.
And it just gets very messy, especially in these group settings, the Divine Truth group settings.
Yep.
And I think women have such a huge misconception of what being loving towards a man looks like.
Yeah,
and
that's what I want to talk about.
Let Mary make
a
few comments about it.
Yeah. I wanted to say, so Jesus was talking to the men really directly about, guys, there's issues here. And I referenced that there's a lot of grieving that men actually have to do. So the first thing I want to say to my sisters is we need to change our attitude emotionally about men crying, for a start. Because the majority of us have one or both of the following beliefs. A man is a weakling if he cries, because I feel insecure in some way. I've got some kind of fear. Or two, my fulfillment of my purpose as a nurturing, wonderful woman is to carry this sadness for this man, make him feel like it's okay, that he hasn't been such a bad boy, and come to mummy, I'll give you a cuddle, and it's okay, you can feel it. But actually all we're doing in that place is shutting him down from feeling it and telling him it's our job to feel that for you, not you. So those two things are highly damaging to men, and most women think they're completely legitimate, and the second one most of us feel completely proud about. We almost get turned on sometimes by being able to nurture a man, depending on what our dad was like. If our dad wanted us to be a quasi-mummy, often then we get attracted to men who put out this, oh, I need mothering, I really am a good guy, but I'm just sad. And then, we feel drawn into a relationship with that man. That is really damaging for both of us. And also, when we project at men, you've just got to be the tough guy and the protector and have your feelings, but also meet all of my addictions to feel safe and secure. We'll totally shut down that man. And we get in this place where if you're not careful, you project at the man, you are failing me by not being a spiritual and emotional being. But also, as soon as you start, now I'm withdrawing myself, my sexuality, my love, my emotion, my approval, because now I'm not willing to feel something scary or hurt from my past. So that's the first two things that I wanted to mention earlier about women need to take responsibility for our attitudes towards men. And part of that is how you love a man, Anna. You decide, I'm going to have all of my feelings and desire for the man to have all of his, and whatever he feels, I will feel whatever I feel. So that's very important.
That sounds quite simple.
Yeah. Simple, but
hard.
Most of us are pretty resistive to it. Yeah. And the other thing that I see in a lot of the women here who come is, now that you have some education, Jesus is very vocal with men about how damaging their attitudes are, how much we have been harmed by men, and a lot of women, then it starts to connect to them to, yeah, that's true, and yeah, I feel really angry, I feel really sad, and then you start wanting to tell the guys, hey, you're doing that thing that Jesus said, and you want to change them rather than feel. You want them to get it, rather than you just feel how it feels.
Or you can remember it this way, you want them to get it before you have to grieve it.
And it doesn't work that way. Unless, if it's in you, you're going to have to grieve it. Even if he does get it, then you often, I've seen women feel a bit dissatisfied with that as well. It's like, oh great, well now he's having his feelings, but I still feel hurt,
I'm too angry.
So these are all the ways that women really not only delay our own progress, but work against men progressing on the very things that we're quite upset about. Yeah.
But you did raise another issue, Anna, which is the issue regarding how you end up treating certain kinds of men. Yeah. So that's something Mary wanted to talk about with you as well.
Yeah. Well, you go ahead.
No, you start.
No, I feel that is also such an important point, that most of the time we have been trained by our mothers and our fathers to look up to guys who are more bossy and more demanding, and because we think they're going to give us our addictions more. And also,
can you maybe explain how?
Yeah, so often we feel like if a man dominates the environment, our fear of the environment will lessen. All we have to do is get control of that man, or get the approval of that man. And
get the sexual control of that man, if you can.
He will handle the environment for us. Whereas if we don't have that, then we feel like, oh, I'm alone in this environment. So this is why women often give more attention, more accolade, they seek out men like this more, because it's really selfishly trying to avoid certain fears within us about how's everyone in this environment going to respond to me. Whereas if I have this, he doesn't meet this addiction. It was one of my big problems in the beginning. If I have this guy who's willing to dominate some people and feel superior to people, most other people in this environment will agree to what he wants and what he says, and then I feel like, not just like everybody is less of a threat to me. Mm-hmm. So we tend to give these men more of ourselves, more of our time, more of our... we listen to them more, all to...
It's not the primary reason, though.
Try to manage that fear. Say more.
The primary reason is because you're scared of them.
Yeah. Yes, yes. So that's what I was going to say. It's not... I've just got to manage one guy, not all the guys or all the people.
So you want him to manage all the guys, but now you have to manage the one guy.
I was getting there, wasn't I? But I stopped myself. But it's like if I withdraw from him, then there's him and all the other people. And he's probably the scariest. So if I deal with the scariest and get him under control, I feel like...
there's more to it even than that.
Sorry.
And that is that most women have learnt that they feel that they can grieve. Most of you girls feel this way. You can cry if you have to cry. But when it comes to feeling afraid, that's when you get angry. You understand? Many of you will recognise that, you can handle crying if you have to cry. But when you feel like you're scared, now you don't want to feel fear. You want to feel anger. You want to get power over your fear. Now, with men who have been taught, a lot of times by their own mothers, ironically, to be feeling superior, because they feel superior, you're automatically feeling like you are lesser than them in their eyes and therefore at risk of their poor treatment, which of course you are, right? And so there is a stronger desire then to pander to those men. But unfortunately what that does is it turns them into bigger monsters. Mm-hmm. It makes them feel more justified. More important and more justified to treat you badly. And it's a common saying amongst men that if you treat a woman meanly, what? You keep him keen. Have you heard that statement? Mm-hmm. Treat a woman mean, you keep her keen. Why? It's because you treat her mean, she's afraid. If you keep her afraid, now she needs you to allay her fear, right? So she's going to be needy for you to allay her fear, ironically. She's going to want to try to impress you so that you don't hurt her, right? And so a lot of it is the refusal by women to not feel fear.
Refusal to feel
fear. Refusal, too negative, sorry about that. The refusal to feel fear, the constant desire to not feel it. And, you see this in mothers when they're bringing up their sons. They enter a relationship, the husband isn't very nice, so what they do is they connect to their sons and they try to get them to be nice, right? Thinking that that's going to somehow fix the problem. But the trouble is, by pandering to these boys, they become men who believe themselves to be superior to women, including superior to their own mothers. Mm. So, of course, the very thing you were avoiding, you created, right? And, of course, the men, the fathers in the family, generally already believe themselves to be superior, so they're happy when the boy is a proper man, as the saying goes. And so when the boy is mummied, of course, the father usually dumps on the boy a bit, right? Because he's pandering to mummy too much, He needs to be his own man type of feeling. Ironically, partially true, but he's saying he needs to be his own man, but he wants it to be brutish. He wants it to be like have power over her, right? And so he's getting a feeling of favouritism from his mother and a feeling of attack from his father. So now he's anti his father, he's in competition with his father for his mother's love. Right? And mum's giving him more love than she gives the husband. And so naturally he feels he's better than his father, even if he's not as powerful as his father. Physically, he still feels that he's better. And as a result, he then also feels he's better than other men. As a result, he feels that you women should treat him as if he's better than other men. And as a result of that, when you do, he thinks you're a lovely girl and he'll give you some rewards. If you don't, he'll treat you badly. He will. He'll be condescending to you, belittling of you, put you down.
And potentially even violent.
Potentially violent, yeah.
Which is the fear that most women are trying to manage.
Yeah. So it is an intergender problem, but in all of what I just said, I'm not saying that men are not responsible for their bad behaviour. You follow? Men, you are responsible, no matter how you've been brought up, no matter how you've been treated by women in the past, no matter how you've been pandered to by your mummies, right? And no matter what other things have happened, it does not justify your bad behaviour towards women. Even if women want you to treat them badly, you should not do it. You understand? Just because somebody wants you to, it doesn't mean that you now should be able to get away with it. Right? So don't do it. And of course, it also means that when a woman feels afraid, you should not rescue her from her fear. You shouldn't feel like you're a great man rescuing her from her fear. If you do, that's a part of the problem. You follow? You need to go, right, she's afraid. Now I'm inclined, there'll be an inclination in you because of the sin to go, now I've got to rescue her. Right? Now I've got to be the man for her. Now I've got to prove myself to her by, protecting her from what's happening. She can handle it. She's been created to handle it, and there's a lot of things she handles better than you do.
And as women, we mustn't protect the fear in each other and be like, oh yeah, it's so bad, you're so scared, it's not safe.
Correct.
We can do that, I think, a lot in groups of women.
So it does require some courage on the part of women to be able to stand up to men who make you feel afraid.
Yeah, and just feel what comes up when
Totally.
Yeah.
And the reality is, we need to do that for our own selves, and waiting on men, which is what I do see as a sort of a general kind of attitude once women have some education, is the demand on men or waiting on men to sort it out. So really the feeling is so that I don't have to feel about it, which doesn't work. But we, as women, are more likely to do it before the men anyway. Yeah. And if we keep making excuses for ourselves, we just delay our own happiness, and we support the ongoing sin around us as well.
And love would want to.
Yes. Love, your relationship with God will cause you to want to do that.
Yeah.
And to want to see how Jesus wrote up the sort of 4 kind of aspects of ourselves that we talk about.
Yeah.
When you begin your relationship with God, you want to see everyone has those 4 aspects of them.
In that priority.
And so in our sin, often we see the opposite gender as a physical and sexual kind of a being. Even if we say we want an emotional or a spiritual man, we have a lot of demands that they sexually validate us and make us feel physically safe, which is a reduction of them in that's not a reality of who they are. And men also in their sin have a tendency to want the woman to sexually and physically validate them. Either she's a sort of a trophy.
Like a sexual object trophy.
Like an object to display, or she's someone who provides them with sexual and physical validation, which is also a diminishing of the woman, of her true nature.
Because she's far more than that.
Yeah. And when you really grow in your relationship with God, you won't see people as genders anymore. They just will be individuals, Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You remember at the beginning, was it Friday morning, I said, how many of you are living alone? Put up our hands again. Living alone. That's a lot, eh? This is why.
All the things we've just been talking about.
Yeah. Because there's no connection between the genders anymore. The men have a disconnection, and now women too have a disconnection. And many of you girls are trying to protect yourself from the men by being alone, by being separate, but also don't have the courage to, when a man is showing these kinds of behaviour, to face up to it with him, to say, here you go again. You're being a mongrel again, man.
I think that's what we don't think we can say. I remember you've given me examples of, this is what I'd say to that guy in that situation.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, I can say that.
I've got some friends at home, and in the first century I used to do this, around Peter. I'd put my arm around him and I said, Peter, you're being a mongrel with the girls again, man. And he was a total mongrel with the girls. Treated them badly, treated Mary badly all the time. And I said, you've got to change this, otherwise I don't want to spend much time with you, man. Yep. And I said to a group recently in Australia, the reason why I don't want to spend a lot of time with a lot of men is because of this one problem. They keep treating my sisters badly. You know, it's one we often get a lot of lovely sisters getting together, feeling their spiritual and emotional nature, and then the men come along and they treat them badly. Sad, but we would love to see. You notice in this audience, it's half-half, isn't it? Round about. How many men? Put up hands, guys. Right. How many women? Yeah, half-half, pretty close, isn't it? How often do you see that in the spiritual circles? Very rare. Now, that's because of our attractions, because we treat men and women the same. But at home, what happens is the men come along, they come along for a little while, we talk to them about their behaviour, they go away and they don't want to come back. Because they're all snotty about being, having their behaviour exposed. Right? Why? It's going to be good for you. What I find is this is something for you to contemplate as guys. The more equally you treat the women around you, all of the women around you, your mothers, your children, your wives, whatever, and also friends, people you see, the more equally you treat them, the more those women are going to like you. So if you feel generally women don't like you very much, have a look at your behaviour towards them. Yeah? And I'm not talking about being liked because you're superior and the girls look up to that. I'm talking about really being liked because of your personality and the way in which your character has developed. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, there are many women who don't like me. There's just as many women who don't like me as there are men who don't like me. It's a pretty even thing, but it's not because of the way I treat women.
Yeah, it is. You don't meet their addictions and they don't like it.
Yeah, it is, she says.
It's a good thing.
Well, it might be better to say there's an even number of both because I don't meet men's addictions either. Yeah. And obviously some people are going to be upset about that, but, that's good. If you don't feed an addiction of a person and they get upset, well, that's good. At least they're upset about something instead of getting their addiction met and not feeling upset at all. So we've got to learn to have the courage to stick by God's principles in our interactions with people. But that means it's going to be a bit tricky for women, probably more than men initially, because men revert to violence more frequently than women do about that. Now, when I say men revert to violence, I'm talking about physical violence and sexual violence. Women revert to emotional violence. So many of you girls are very good at emotional violence. Right? You've had to be, in order to compete with the man's physical and sexual violence. So that is something that you will need to address too. But, the reality is, because most women are a little more connected to their spiritual nature than most men are, the reality is that most men are more divorced from it. Yeah. We've been encouraged to be for centuries. My own father encouraged me to do that. Took me out shooting, hunting, fishing. We'd jump off cliffs. Do you think the girls would do it? They weren't crazy enough. They thought, I might get hurt. Many times we got hurt. We did, many times. You jump off a 30-foot high cliff and into the river. There's all sorts of potential dangers, and quite often I would come out of it with my back hurting and my legs hurting and whatever else hurting, and quite often the nether regions hurting and everything, and everyone's going, yeah, wasn't that great? Yeah, let's do that again. Can we go higher? You know, you get out the motorbike and off you go, and you're revving around on the motorbike and jumping over jumps and doing all these things in the air most of the time. And then one of you falls off and breaks their leg or whatever, and you go, oh, well, that's a surprise. You know, these are how men prove themselves to other men, but, you know, often we do very illogical things, if you think about it. You know, our body has limitations and we don't respect them at all generally. Women respect the limitations of their bodies usually more than men do. Because most men are there trying to bravado themselves through everything. And, you know, I've been brought up the same as you guys, with the same... My brother, Mary's met my brother, Mary's met my father. She knows what they're like. They have very little respect for women. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think the first time I met your brother, he didn't talk to me. He talked to you in front of me about me. Asked about me in front of with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. It's, you know, if I had asked my brother or my father today what Mary's vocation was, they wouldn't be able to tell you. I've lived with Mary for 17 years, 18 years. And they still wouldn't be able to tell you. Because they're not interested. They're interested in themselves and they're interested in the woman there. In my case, my mother, her name's Maxine. They're interested in Maxine looking after them. You know, she cooks for them, cleans for them. You know, up until my father... Recently my mother got cancer and is very, very ill. For the very first time in his life, my father started cooking.
He's 80 or something, isn't he?
Yeah, he's 81. Yeah. Very first time. I've never seen him cook a meal. I used to cook a meal when I was a child 3 times a week for our family. I'd never seen my father do it except if it was a barbecue. Yeah. You know, I've never seen my father wash the clothes. Ever. I used to do it twice a week. I got paid for it. I set up a deal with my mother. I could see my mother was working. She occasionally had a little 5 cents here and 10 cents there, you know. And in my childhood I said, Mum, rather than you do it, I'd like to earn some pocket money. Would you be all right if I cleaned the bathroom, did the washing for you 2 days a week, and also cooked 3 meals a week? She says, yeah. That's how I got my first camera, by saving up and using that method. So, you know, I recognised at a very young age in this life that women were treated quite badly, expected to do all of these things that the guys didn't want to do. And, you know, every second weekend, my father would go for 3 days off. This was his recreation time. He would work 5 days a week. Well, at that time it was 5.5 or 6 days a week he would work. And then the 2 weekends he would get off a month, he would go to the Army Reserves, and spend it with his mates. Riding motorbikes. Shooting guns. All the things he loved. And my mum was just left home. Yeah. So you can understand why many women feel very offended, with men's behaviour. And I do understand why many of you girls feel like you want to protect yourself from men. I get that. But it's far better to have the argument with them that's necessary. Otherwise they will continue to think that their behaviour is fine. My father continues to this day to believe that his behaviour towards my mother was fine. He's now 83. She's 79. And I'm sure that many of you could relate the same experience. Mm-hmm. Yep. So it is a problem we need to address, and the point of it being that how can you connect to God who has masculine and feminine qualities if you are in opposition to those feminine qualities? And I must say, and in opposition to the masculine ones too, because God's not a violent being. God's not a power-hungry person. He has power, but he doesn't wield it in your life, does he? Have you noticed that? Like, he has authority in the sense that he created the laws, but he could be bossing you around every single day, just like many of your husbands try to. But he doesn't, because it's not the true expression of masculinity. Yeah? So we need to come to understand, as both men and women need to come to understand what femininity is and what masculinity is. And we need to embrace it. But the only way we're going to get educated about that is to have God's version of it. And the only way we can get that is by having the relationship with God. Yeah. So remember I said Friday that everything gets back to whether you're going to receive love from God or not. That's where it gets back to.
Yeah.
Your future life, your future experiences, your future power, your future joy, all dependent upon it. And God's given you this opportunity. The opportunity's been available for 2,000 years now, given you the opportunity to receive this love on a personal level. And it doesn't make any sense to me why anyone wouldn't take it. But I do understand that people are not going to. But it doesn't make logical sense to me. Yeah. Anyway, Anna, does that help at all?
Yeah.
Yep.
Actually, thanks.
With the man-woman thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the fear that the women experience when they're with men who think themselves to be powerful or feel themselves to be powerful, responding to it becomes your own injury, doesn't it? Yep.
More sin.
Yeah. Or sin. Yep.
More sin.
Yep.
Yeah. And dismissing the men who are less confident, more sin.
Yeah. Don't mistake confidence for... I don't think confidence is the right word. Don't mistake confidence for sin or the lack of it. Confidence is a good quality to have. You know, God...
Oh, no, I said dismissing the men who are less confident or power-driven, that's also a sin, if you dismiss them based on that.
True masculinity is confident, just like true femininity is.
Certainly.
So they're not sins. It's the man demonstrating other problems where he wants power. That's what you've got to confront. So don't think that a person who's confident is got a sin. The person who wants power is the person who wants the sin.
But not to take advantage of those who have a lack of confidence.
Well, a lack of confidence in itself is a sin, right? But don't take advantage of it. Yeah? Don't take advantage of it. It is a sin to have a lack of confidence because God wants you to have confidence. Mm-hmm. He wants you to feel relaxed with people and relax. Like at the moment, if I put you in front of like 100 people, the average person would go, you know, they're all looking at me. What am I going to do? God doesn't want you to feel that way. God wants you to be able to be in front of 5,000 people and say your piece. You know what I mean? That's how God wants you to feel confident. But God doesn't want you to try to take power over those 5,000 people. Right? That's a sin. And that's a very bad sin, actually. That's going to be very hard to correct as well. Yeah. Yeah.
And to be okay that, you know, we'll try and be courageous and stand up for love and love our brothers, and we'll get it wrong sometimes.
You may, yeah, because you've got to remember that you're a work in progress, right? Yeah. A WIP. No, that's what they use in, like business terms, don't they? Work in progress, WIP. And as a work in progress, you're not going to always do the most loving thing, given the fact that you've yet to receive God's love to the point of perfection of that love, right? So you are going to have to do something, because to do nothing is such a huge sin, right? And so you're going to have to do something about it. You're going to make mistakes. You know, had a conversation with. It was with you, I think it was. Yvette. Back home in Australia, just before you come back home, and you were complaining about how Andy didn't want you to drive the car with a certain woman, and you're saying, he's just trying to get power over me. And I go, no, he wasn't. He was just being logical. The woman you wanted to drive your car for you takes drugs. And I wouldn't want her to drive my car either. You know what I mean? And remember I said that to you? And I said, so why do you think that's the problem when there's other things going on? But that wasn't one. That wasn't a problem. But you're going to get it wrong sometimes. But have the conversation.
Yeah.
Have the discussion so that you work through the issues. You're going to get it wrong sometimes. But if you're both in attunement, in alignment with what God is telling you, that's a lot easier than trying to work it out between yourselves. So for example, if Mary knows God feels this way and I am uncertain, then Mary's going to stick to her guns because God feels that way. But if Mary doesn't know God feels that way, can you see she's going to become uncertain too? Right? And now two uncertain people trying to resolve an issue. And what's going to happen then? It's highly likely we're going to resolve it in alignment with our injuries, our sins, than it is in alignment with God's truth. So this is why it's so important to seek God first. Right? To seek God's truth first and seek God's love first, so that I've got a definition in me about what that is. And so when somebody comes along and says, right, I think you're wrong, and you go, well, okay, you might think I'm wrong, but I can feel God enough to know that it's right, right? But unfortunately for many of you, like we've pointed out yesterday, you believe spirits around you are God. And there's many, many dark men spirits and many dark spirits around women as well who believe themselves to be connected to God or believe themselves to be God, and they're trying to claim to you that they're God. So you're going to have to be very circumspect about doing that too. Until you've developed enough emotionally and developed enough understanding of what's going on around you, to the point where you can tell that's a spirit, that's God, that's a spirit, that's God, until you be able to separate the two from each other, you're going to have to be circumspect there as well. Yeah? Yeah. Nellie, you ready? G'day.
So I feel angry towards men in my life.
Yep.
I realized with the channeling. And I also realized that I wanted to keep angry.
Yes.
I wanted to hold anger.
Yes.
And I wanted to justify, basically say they are bad and will keep them out of my life. And
yes. Yeah, this is the dangerous thing. When we have emotions of sadness that we want to gain power over, we get angry. When we get angry, we can use justice, our internal version of justice, as a desire to stay angry. So I'm not giving up my anger until they all change. Until the very last one of them changes, I'm not being less angry. As soon as I see, so you might meet 5 men who treat you nicely and then 1 man doesn't. See, there you go again. There's their real nature, that kind of thing. And this kind of behaviour is actually disabling you from your own loving progress. Do you follow?
Yes.
So the key is to look at the internal ideas you have about justice. You see, God's version of justice is very different to our own. God's version of justice is related to one primary thing, and that is the person repentant or not? Right? If the person is repentant, then of course mercy can be shown. God shows mercy to everyone who's repentant. If a person continues in their behaviour, they are demonstrating that they are not repentant. Now, I'm not suggesting to remain angry with them. I am suggesting if a person isn't repentant, re-entering an arrangement of some kind with them, like a living arrangement or partnership or whatever with them, or even a relationship with them, is dangerous. Because they are going to continue to do the thing that they did before. So let's say I'm a man and Mary and I are together, and I am a man, so I should say it like that. I am a man, Mary and I are together. I forgot for a moment. No. And Mary and I are together, but I decide I'm going to cheat on her sexually. Right? I decide that, somebody I meet in one of these audiences looks prettier or whatever. So I cheat on her. Now, Mary would probably straight away feel that, straight away anyway, and find out about it. When she does find out about it, when does she re-enter a relationship with me sexually? If she wants to, because she might not want to, ever again. That's her right, if that's what she wants to do. But if she wants to, what does she need to be very careful about doing? She needs to be very careful about thinking that because I say I'm sorry, that I'm actually sorry. Does that make sense? She needs to wait, really, until I have dealt with the emotions that caused me to have the desire to do such a thing. Because if she doesn't, I'm likely to do it again. Huh?
But that's not I've still got to deal with my anger.
Yeah. So
regardless,
she can release her rage or anger about how, I've done that and broken our bond. I'm not broken a piece of paper. I've broken a spiritual, emotional, sexual and physical bond, right, by doing that. So she could be upset about that being broken. She'll get to a point where she's perfect, where she wouldn't even get upset about it, but that doesn't mean that she would re-enter the relationship with me. Right? She would be firm. And what I see a lot of men doing, but I said I'm sorry. Don't you understand how sorry I am? I said I'm sorry. But I don't see them being sorry enough to actually deal with the reason why they did it. Right? God expects you to be sorry enough to the point that you actually deal with the reason why you did it. Then, from God's perspective, you're sorry. That's what repentance is. So, Mary would be wise to wait for me to have God's version of repentance before she re-entered the relationship with me. Does that make sense?
Did you have more to your question, Nellie? No.
Yeah, it was more that I realized that you said it before, like anger is your guide, and that I just realized now that the principle. Of that
it's showing you this.
It's a doorway.
Mm-hmm.
It's a doorway. You need to go through your anger, just like Violetta had to go through some of her anger to get to the sadness, and you need to allow your sadness. I'm talking more the reason for the anger, which was about justice.
Yeah.
Whenever somebody does things that are wrong, internally we feel a sense of injustice, right? And the problem is we can use rage we can use our version of justice to stay in a place of rage. Mm-hmm. That harms yourself. You're no longer just harming other people with your rage. You're now harming yourself. It feels really bad to stay in a place of rage, right? And it does. It's a gut-wrenching thing to stay there. And the main reason why people stay there is they don't want to cry. They don't want to let go of the reason why they want to retain the sense of justice, which is that was done to me, I'm going to make them pay. I'm going to make them suffer. Yep.
And the belief that I'm going to prevent my suffering by keeping them away, which actually isn't true.
That's even more suffering.
It is.
Because I'm alone.
Yes, and also just the rage itself.
You're carrying around the suffering.
A suffering.
Yeah, it's there inside, you can't
relax and
it's
enjoy.
It's a grief that's with you all the time.
Yeah.
And so it's going to have its effect. It has its effect physically, emotionally, spiritually, sexually, everywhere.
And actually the very thing that Jesus was explaining before about the discernment, about whether someone is truly repentant or not, we are less discerning the further we are away from our own the further we are away from forgiveness.
Yeah.
So the more enraged we are, the less discerning we'll be about whether or not someone's truly repentant. As we get into our grief, we become more sensitive to it. And when our grief is when it's finished, when we've made our way through it and we've forgiven, that's when we're the most discerning about the other person's intentions now.
And whether they're repentant or not.
So it actually alters our reality, even being in holding on to rage.
Yeah. The reality is repentance and forgiveness are two independent acts. when you forgive somebody, you're doing it for yourself. You're doing it so that you let go of the rage and the sadness that's within you about what happened. That's for you. You need to do that for you. The process of you forgiving another person, that's going to have to happen for your sake, right? But that doesn't mean that you will still, by that stage, when you do forgive a person, you'll be able to see, are they repentant? So their repentance is independent of your forgiveness. You understand? Mm-hmm. So when they say they're sorry, but you can feel and they act like they're not, then they're not. But when you're in a state of forgiveness, you would recognise that and go, yeah, they're not. You wouldn't be in a rage about it and go, yeah, you're not. You know, you just go, yeah, haven't changed yet.
But also, sometimes you don't even tell. You want to accept the sorry because you want to have an addiction to avoid the sadness.
Yeah.
So
you want somebody to be sorry reliable. So you don't have to cry. Yeah. That's a part of the justice feeling that you have. The part of the justice feeling you have is, I want all these guys to be sorry for how they treated me before I'm going to cry about how they treated me. Mm-hmm. And there's also almost a feeling that if they were all sorry for what they did, I wouldn't have to cry. But the trouble with that idea is that the sadness is now in you. Mm-hmm. So you are going to have to cry whether they're sorry or not, unfortunately. Right? Just like Violetta, she was going to have to cry whether the priests and the men who harmed her ever repent for what they did or not. She will need to cry for her own sake so she can let it all go, let all the pain go. And then God's love can come and heal her. And then she'll be free of it, even if the men aren't. Yeah. So it's going to have to happen anyway, so you might as well get on with it. You know, get it over and done with as soon as you can, type of thing. That's sort of the approach I have with my feelings, is if you're going to have to cry, you might as well do it now. Not put it off to tomorrow, you know. Like, what's the point of putting off tomorrow something you could do right now? You might as well, if you've got to cry, do it now. Get it over and done with. You'll feel better tomorrow. You know? That's sort of the attitude we need to have. Remember the ant emotions? Treat them like they're not mountains. They're like anthills. We can get over them, but we have to feel them to get over them. Yeah. So the injustice feeling in many women, which many women have, and I don't know if you notice it, but you will notice it when you release your own injustice feelings. How many women are carrying around injustice feelings? It's quite intense. Mm-hmm. I understand why they are, because most women have been treated so unjustly most of their lives, many times without even realising how unjust it's been, right? And when they do, they get pretty upset about it. But even when they don't, there's some kind of soul knowing that it's been unjust, right? And so there's a lot of anger in many people and many women. There's a lot of anger about this. When you get rid of your own, you recognise, I recognise that in these other women that you're with. You know, you go, oh yeah, you've got what I used to have. You know, this sense of justice, and I've got to stick to my guns type of thing. And when you release it, you'll realise, I feel free of that now, and how much freedom that's giving you, but also how much freedom it's giving you to assess the accuracy of a man's true feelings. Yeah. Sure. When you're angry, you're going to think that every man's the same. When you're no longer angry and you've worked through your grief about how men have treated you, you'll be able to tell, there's another man who's the same, there's another man who's the same, there's another man who's the same. Oh, there's another man. He's not the same. You know, you'll be able to tell the difference. You'll find there is a lot of men that are the same with regard to this injury, but you'll also find the occasional one who isn't. Mm.
Yeah.
How's the time going, guys?
It's 3:10, Dom.
How many of you need to wee? Is this yeah? Maybe if can we have a 5-minute break and just have a short break?